The world has ended. Everything that remains of humanity's culture is stored here in this podcast, a time capsule assembled by three white dudes from what was once called the Midwest. This is not everything. This is not most things. But this is it.
Hello and welcome to another episode of This Is It, a pop culture podcast for the end of the world. I'm Sam Webb.
And I'm Gabe Webb.
And I'm Daniel Osborne.
And what we try to do on this show is condense all of our massive media landscape for those of you who just have a little bit of time in your day, in your bunker, having survived the first wave of the alien invasion or the last wave in the ocean before it dried up.
Just everyone turning out for this really lame final wave. Bye, ocean.
We'll miss you. What would happen then? Do you think they have jars? Like, are they collecting it?
I mean, there's a XKCD what if about if all the oceans drained away.
But does it involve the final wave?
I mean, basically. I mean, the short answer is we all die. But I mean, that's the idea that we're operating under for the show anyway, so it works.
Yeah. Well, I imagine the final wave as just a pile of chicken bones blowing across the very deep trench in the earth where the ocean used to be. I don't know why chickens are
right? What?
piled up and dead down there.
All those undersea chickens.
We thought icebergs were the only thing that had 90% of its mass under the oceans, but it turns out 90% of chickens were just hanging out there. But we're not going to talk.
My only other thought is that chicken bones end up actually being super absorbent, and when we start dumping them in the sea, it starts sucking up all the ocean, and that's what causes the final wave.
Yeah, the Buffalo Wild Wings franchise is actually at fault for most of the drying up of the oceans, because I'm assuming they just have trucks full of wing bones that they're just dumping.
I imagine that this is like a Stone Soup or like a Pied Piper scenario where some kind of cult leader has risen to global prominence and convinced all of us to turn the ocean into chicken soup. But we let it boil too long and we leave the stove on overnight and it all just evaporates away.
Oh, yeah, the giant earth stove.
It's called the core, Sam. It's really hot down there.
If there was a cult leader who could harness the power of the Earth's core to create a massive worldwide chicken soup, sign me up. Like, I'm gonna, like, that guy's gotta have something right.
Also, he has a really unambitious plan. Like, can harness Earth's core, wants to make soup.
Well, I think that's what kind of gets, like, that's where his charismatic powers come into play, because he's kind of non-threatening, even though he's got this ability to potentially annihilate the whole world. But he just wants to make everybody soup, and that's kind of nice, you know?
Yeah, that's admirable.
Yeah, I respect it. I don't understand it, but I mean, who am I to judge?
Yeah, I mean, we're in the middle of winter. I want soup.
Yeah, soup is on the menu.
Plus, if you evaporate the soup, it'll turn into soup clouds and rain soup down on everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you got a real cloudy with a chance of soup scenario.
This just got gross. I don't know why that was my line, but that was grim.
Chicken soup for the... I don't have
the crops.
Yeah, chicken soup for the all.
Chicken soup for the post-apocalyptic soul.
Yeah, there you go.
That's the title of his book. That's their holy book.
I like to imagine this guy wrote this book and then died, and then 500 years later, all the non-sold copies got discovered in a landfill, and that's actually what caused the end of the world. Is people just reading it as if it's a religious text and following it to the letter. when it was really just an extended metaphor for like being more honest or vulnerable. I don't know. That's not the name of it. That's not what this episode's about, though, right, Gabe? I think you.
No,
God, I
no.
hope
Similar though. Similar.
Okay.
This episode, I thought we could talk about getting older and how it's portrayed in popular media.
I like that. I think that, yeah, it would probably be something that we would have to explain to people who live in a world where only the fit survive.
Yeah. I mean, we all know that in the year 3500, the average age at which people die is 14, but
God.
because they're so much farther from the sun, it's really like 3,000 for us.
Oh, wow. That's an impressive...
I mean, they really took getting older to the next level.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have to show them what it was like to be them in our reality.
Back when 80 seemed unpleasant and not just like the age you get your first car.
Yeah, you get to 80s when you get to start crossing roads by yourself in the future, apparently. But yeah, no, I like that because in the maybe more optimistic version, our version of old people would be like young adults, and in the less optimistic version, our version of old people would be dusty bones.
Yeah.
Either way, we got a sweet spot that the future needs to know about.
No, but yeah, I thought it would be interesting to take a dive into all the ways we both, hold our elders up as these sort of paragons of wisdom, and also sort of maybe even bring them down a little unfairly.
I'd say in pop culture, it's more the second one than the first one.
Right.
Yeah, reverence is in pretty short supply compared to the amount of, isn't it funny that this is happening and it's an old doing it? And that was my youthful giggle.
I don't know if you two had anything come to mind in particular as we sort of prepared to talk about old people.
Yeah, I had one. I have one in particular that really plays against the type, but I feel like I first have to set up the type. And I'm going to do that with a film called Nebraska. Nebraska is a story about an old man who gets a sweepstakes thing in the mail, and it says, "Congratulations, Magazine Publishers Clearinghouse, you've won $1 million." And he literally sets off walking to go claim his $1 million, and his son and wife try and stop him, and eventually the son just gives in to how stubborn and senile his dad is and drives him to Nebraska from, I think, Montana or somewhere else to go and claim this obviously fake $1 million. The film's a journey, as lots of them are, and it ends up kind of coming around in a different way, but it really sets up for me the old people, roll our eyes. We all know they're stupid and stubborn and don't know what they're talking about, and they read books written by Bill O'Reilly, but I guess we have to love them.
Yeah, I think that Nebraska is a good example for setting that up, because it definitely starts 100% in that space of kind of that place where you go from your parents being your role models and the people you respect and listen to more than anybody else to this place of now you kind of have to shift into the more adult role of kind of keeping them from hurting themselves in whatever way.
Yeah.
And that's like that. And, but also that they're senile and they're going to make mistakes and do all sorts of silly things. And then as the movie progresses, if I remember correctly, it kind of comes around on itself a little bit where the son character has to stand up for, people are making fun of his dad and he stands up for his dad, and it's a sweet moment.
Yeah, and the kind of reversal of roles is something that, especially when a story is told from from the child point of view happens a lot, but it ends up being an old person can be more than just a pain in the ass. That surprise, old people are humans worthy of love and patience and kindness, just like the youngs, the olds and the youngs. We all happen to be people, and that's kind of where it ends up. But it does set up for us the archetype of like old people, and I think the other thing it does is it sets up that old people doing things kind of is automatically funnier. Like at one point, the father's wife goes to a grave of an old boyfriend and like taunts him and said, "You could have had me if you hadn't been, so obsessed with your tractors." And she like lifts up her skirt and like flashes his grave, which is a legitimately hilarious moment, but gets definitely funnier because this respected but older actress is the one who's doing it, which is another thing that comes up a lot in old people culture.
Yeah, I think there's definitely that movie does it in a pretty fun but still like grounded way, but there are lots of examples of basically old people doing things you wouldn't expect them to do because old people it's assumed they're all quiet and polite, and if they're cursing or rapping or doing drugs, it's hilarious.
I was thinking about that. What do we know what the first rapping grandma movie was? Do we know where that started?
It's definitely like a trope that Happy Madison movies, like Adam Sandler's production company, utilizes a lot.
Yeah, the first one that came to mind was The Wedding Singer for me.
I feel like that's the genesis, at least in my mind. I can't think of an earlier example of a rapping granny.
The plot of The Wedding Singer is irrelevant. It basically says it in the title, but at a wedding, grandma starts rapping. And I guess it was funny the first time, and now it's been done a lot.
Yeah.
And I think it culminated in a terrible movie that I don't know if either of you have seen. I fell asleep watching it one time. It's called Grandma's Boy, which is basically a whole movie that is in the Happy Madison canon. I'm pretty sure they produced it. And it is essentially an entire movie of just, like, at least most of the story is about, it's about like a stoner guy who moves in with his grandma, and then all the grandparent antics that happen. And it's just a whole movie of rapping granny style humor. Don't see it. That's not going in the canon. I'm just it's an anti-recommendation.
Ooh, the anti-time capsule.
Yeah. The Antechamber, our sister podcast where we just don't recommend things.
This is not it.
Yeah, it's called No, please don't do it with this one.
All right, who's got the next one?
Nebraska was one that I had come prepared with because, like we said, it sort of takes on the side of aging in media that sort of almost infantilizes old people by sort of pointing out that, as we get older, our ability to do things on our own sort of begins to wane again. But I also came with a few things that I think sort of look at the opposite edge of that. And one director in particular whose work stands out to me as someone who holds up old people a lot is Hayao Miyazaki, the Japanese animation director. And I don't know how familiar either of you two are with his work.
Not at all. I saw a poster for a Miyazaki film festival here in town, and I was like, oh, I should maybe watch those at some point. And that's about where it ends.
Yeah, I am similarly, like I'm familiar with them in the sense that I know they're supposed to be great, and I have never watched any of them. Interesting.
All right, guys. Get ready to get schooled. No, but I think one of the ways in which his films are particularly outstanding is that he sort of shows the ways in which these unlikely heroes can be the main focus of his films, but they aren't even necessarily these sort of typical unlikely heroes. The one that stands out for older people in my mind is Howl's Moving Castle, which the premise of which is that a young woman is turned into an old woman by a wicked witch, and she goes on a journey to sort of try and get her youth restored. But throughout the movie, we kind of see the ways in which her newfound advanced age works against her, but also how her sort of cunning is not dimmed at all, even though her physical abilities might be. In the film, she meets the titular wizard. I don't know if that's correct, titular or eponymous. She meets the wizard. She meets the wizard, Howl, who is also a sort of brooding and moody type. And he, among other characters throughout the film, are dismissive of her as what they see is an old woman, even though in her mind and in her mental capacity, she is still a young woman and very sharp. So we simultaneously see how she sort of understands the world through a different lens, being viewed a certain way, as people have these sort of preconceived notions of what an old woman should and shouldn't be able to do, or should and shouldn't be able to think. Because I think that movie in particular opens up a whole thread of very similar things, and another one that is far less magical but still sometimes equally hard to believe is the Angela Lansbury TV series Murder, She Wrote.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad someone else brought up Murder, She Wrote.
I love Murder, She Wrote.
It's the greatest. It's so good.
Yeah. Do you want to speak to Murder, She Wrote at all, Dan?
I mean, it's about a female crime author who just travels around and apparently might be like the unluckiest person ever, because wherever she goes, people just die. And like, she's very rare, and she then goes and solves the case. And I don't think she's rarely, if ever, summoned to help solve. Like, she's not Sherlock Holmes. She's not a consulting detective. If you're on a cruise ship with Angela Lansbury, I'd advise you just go ahead and try and leave. Because someone's going down, and it might be you. I mean, then you get to have Angela Lansbury solve your murder, which that's pretty choice. But yeah. If you have an interest in living, maybe go on more excursions and try and get off the boat.
I just like the idea of advertising off of Angela Lansbury free cruise ship.
There are no more Angela Lansburys here.
Murder, She Won't. A cruise line devoted to not letting anybody who has a dark passenger that seems to bring death with her.
But I feel like in later seasons of the show, it actually sort of becomes an in-joke that wherever she is, especially in this small town in rural Maine where she lives, people die. It's like a really dark in-joke that I feel like starts working its way into this show eventually.
I've not seen enough of the later seasons. Just like this mass exodus. Like the population's constantly falling through death and emigration. So I'm sorry, Gabe, what was the real point you wanted to make rather than me gushing about a really corny show?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I bring it up is... if only because a constant thread throughout the show is real police officers dismissing Angela Lansbury's character as, oh, you're just a crime novelist. What would you know? Oh, you're just an old lady. Go back to Maine and count your lobsters while you shuck oysters. But then, I mean, through her own force of will and maybe a total disregard for, at best, investigative procedure, and at worst, the Constitution of the United States, she always solves the crime.
Yeah, the thing that we don't hear in descriptions of Murder, She Wrote very often is roguish vigilante, which is really ultimately what she is.
Angela Lansbury is Batman, guys. She's the world's greatest detective. Death seems to follow her wherever she goes, and she operates entirely outside the law.
Is there any sort of fan theory that maybe she's an incredible serial killer who is just so good at framing other people for murders that...
Wow. That cast the series in an entirely new light. But I do think
she wrote the murders.
I do think my comments about empowering senior citizens still stand, if that is the interpretation we go with.
Yeah, I think if anything, it strengthens it because it's all about the under, they assume that she's less capable because she's older, when really she's like a real Moriarty level villain.
Yeah.
Or just the true puppet master of life and death in the
Angela Lansbury's death.
She wills death into being.
We love you, Mrs. Potts.
Yeah, we do.
Oh, it's so good. It's like... never mind. Edit that out. That doesn't make any sense what I was about to say.
I like the idea that I'm supposed to edit out what you didn't say.
Hold on. I'll give you a little bit more time to edit out what I didn't say. Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool. So you're talking about the people assuming that old people are less capable, and then learning a lesson because of it kind of brings me to one of the categories that I thought of when we were talking about older people as they're portrayed, and that is, I think that there's arguably a subgenre of film that is younger, like middle-aged or younger men dressing up as old women for some sort of purpose, assuming that like this disguise will help them be less, that people will not pay as much attention to them, or will question them less for their reasons for being where they are. And there's two examples that my mind jumps to. One is...
Sam, I already brought up Batman.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Batman. One is Mrs. Doubtfire, and the other is Big Mama's House.
Okay, I've seen one of those.
And it's not the one you think.
Exactly. That's why I left it ambiguous.
Dan, which one have you seen?
I've seen Mrs. Doubtfire, but only really recently.
Okay. Well, I will go ahead and explain Big Mama's House as I remember it. The plot of Big Mama's House is that Martin Lawrence is an FBI agent, I believe, who has to do a stakeout for when a man who is wanted by the FBI is going to return to his grandmother's house to stay in hiding, and so in order to catch him when he surfaces, he puts this man's actual grandmother into witness protection and assumes her life, and so he puts on a big old suit to be a larger older woman, and he is very much playing to the I'm a raunchy grandmother character and takes no shit from nobody kind of thing. And that's basically the whole joke of the movie, is that people underestimate this older woman, and then twist it's actually a secret FBI agent in an old woman suit. And then of course the moral of the story is that Martin Lawrence's character learns that it's wrong to underestimate older people and women. Would you say that's
weird?
Somewhat similarly, the Mrs. Doubtfire is Robin Williams doing a little bit of the same gag of like,
Yeah, I mean, he's dressing like an old woman in order to get close to his children, like we've all done, as it happens. But I feel like having not seen Big Mama Says, I'm not sure, but I feel like the thing about old people in Mrs. Doubtfire is that those attitudes don't change. It's like, oh, sweet old lady, and everyone just buys into it. And there's at no point does anyone ever learn that, like, oh, no, old ladies are capable of things. It's just, oh, we're all just sweet, and I'm also a man.
Yeah, I guess actually the moral of the story in Mrs. Doubtfire is him secretly proving that he can be as sweet and helpful as an old lady. So the big reveal is actually when we go like, oh, we shouldn't underestimate divorced dads either. They can be old ladies too.
Yeah, it's not old ladies are people too. It's FBI agents are people too.
And I guess the third heat in this particular category would be Tootsie, where Dustin Hoffman pretends to be an old lady in order to get cast in a role as an old lady on a soap opera, and then accidentally seduces his co-star and her father.
Oh my god.
Yeah, have you seen Tootsie?
No.
Oh, it's a great movie.
I have not seen enough movies to be co-hosting a pop culture podcast, is what I'm learning.
Hey, we're the only 3 people left in the world to tell people about this. That's the deal.
Yeah.
If we haven't seen it, it doesn't exist.
I'm what you got, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, this is it.
This is it.
Now that we've done our mid-show call out to the premise of the show, what else? What other things do old people do? Gabe kind of already addressed culture that show, old people as well-rounded human beings, but I didn't want another second to go by without mentioning one of my favorite TV shows, and that's The Golden Girls. The Golden Girls is a TV show about 4 women. Most of them, one of them's in her 50s, 2 of them are in their 60s, and one of them's in their 80s, all sharing a house together in Miami. And if it sounds kind of like Friends or Sex and the City, it's because it kind of is. I mean, it came before, but they're all people. They're all humans. They all, shockingly, for the public in the mid-'80s, have sex drives and dreams, goals, aspirations. They don't just knit. They go on adventures. Several of them struggle with chemical dependency. And it's one of those shows that has a lot of, like, and on a very special episode, we learn about steroids. But it's just phenomenal. It's hilarious, but it also shows this, like, there are jokes about them being old and hips hurting and, constipation, I assume. But it does a good job of, old people aren't superheroes. Old people aren't subhumans. Like all of us, it's somewhere in the middle. Kind of a little bit subhuman, a little bit superhero.
Yeah. So it's just on a personal note, it's just one of my favorites. I just giggle like an idiot every time. Like, I'm at my in-laws this weekend, and one of the bright spots is that I now have cable, and the Hallmark Channel runs Golden Girls all the time. So I just get to bask in the warm glow of the beauty of Golden Girls, the golden glow of the Golden Girls.
Which of the Golden Girls do you identify with most?
I mean, I want to grow up and be Sophia, the oldest one, who in the pilot is revealed has lost her filter due to a stroke. They drop that storyline almost immediately, but that remains a thing. I'm deeply concerned that I'm actually Rose, though. That I'm the Betty White character, and I just prattle on for too long, and no one can ever stop me. And sometimes I just keep talking. And no, I can't keep up that joke on a podcast. I'm not going to do that.
This is our first 2.5 hour podcast.
A very special episode.
Yeah, I tell stories about where I grew up and how like cocaine's a hell of a drug. The one last thing while I keep prattling on, I wanted to mention / dig a little bit at 21st century old people and what pop culture they consume. And if any of that's illustrative, like not just pop culture about old people, but pop culture for old people. And I feel like you only need 3 letters, and that's CBS. Because CBS is the network that your dad watches. And I just felt like, we had to bring up NCIS, a crime solving show with a lead character who doesn't understand computers and yells at them, or oh man, I don't know any other CBS shows. Help me out, quick.
Big Bang Theory.
Yeah, which is how old people think nerds live.
Yeah, and how recently there was a Survivor season that was like Gen X versus millennials or something. It was very much like...
And only old people call us by those terms.
And yeah, there was very much like a look at these snowflakes. Ugh, yeah. CBS loves to hate young people, and by virtue of doing that, loves older people.
CBS loves to hate young people, and I promise the feeling is mutual.
One thing that I thought of when we talked about this topic is that because similar to CBS kind of catering to that audience, I think there's also like what older people consume media wise has impacted the film industry in a certain way, where a lot of famous actors and actresses from sort of an older, that are now getting up in years, who were in sort of like action movie type roles when they were younger, or maybe so, maybe not. But either way, like there've been a recent spree of old people action movies, like movies that are all kind of about like we still got it, but not in that like we're still smart, we can solve crimes, or we can prove that we have agency, but specifically like we can still like jump out of planes and shoot people. And that makes me think of there's a movie called Red, which is it stands for something, but it's like Bruce Willis and John Malkovich,
Helen Mirren, and Red, R-E-D, it stands for retired something. Hang on, I have to fact check my retired eponym department. Reality Everclear Distillery.
Okay, so the title of the movie is Red, R-E-D, stands for retired, extremely dangerous.
Oh,
Whoa.
Jesus. I liked mine better.
Yeah, I liked all of yours better. But yeah, it is a movie built around the idea of these people are older, but they can still kick ass. And it's Bruce Willis is a retired CIA operative who, one night a team of assassins descends on his house, and he kills them all easily, and then proceeds to figure out who tried to put a hit out on him, and in doing that, recruits a couple of his old teammates, including John Malkovich, and Helen Mirren or I think they're old teammates or something. But it's all about them being like, well, I was out of the game. Like the older, like previous generations, the trope was like, this is my last job, or this is the, I'm getting too old for this shit. I'm too old and now I'm getting back into this shit. Like that's basically the premise of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen any of these movies, but isn't Taken kind of the same? Like Liam Neeson is sort of in retirement and then comes out of retirement to save his daughter from, I think, Albanians?
Yeah, I would say Taken is an example where Liam Neeson as one man can take down an entire crime ring, that he has like no support team and no anything. He just kind of goes around and beats people up until they tell him where to go next to then beat people up. John Wick is actually kind of the same sort of deal. Keanu Reeves plays like a retired assassin whose dog gets killed by Russians, and then he literally breaks the concrete in his garage where he keeps all his murder supplies, and like the tag, like the trailer has a moment of him going like, people keep asking if I'm back, I guess I'm back. And yeah, like I think
excuse me, I'm buying John Wick on Amazon right now.
John Wick, which is a great movie, and Taken is actually pretty fun too, and Red was okay. Like these are not bad movies, but there's a lot of them. There's actually one that I is not quite as popular. It's called Harry Brown, and it's Michael Caine as like a retired army or some sort of military guy who it's kind of a better depiction of what regular old person life is, because he lives in England in like a old folks home council estate. He's a pensioner and he's got one friend, and they meet every day and they play chess, and then that one friend is beat up by young people and dies.
So it's the movie if like the Punch Game was a real thing and not something made up for Fox News.
Exactly. Like it's playing so much to the, I'm afraid that young people have no, these young people have no moral compass, and they'll do, and so it's literally like this, his friend is beat up because of a gang initiation that goes a little bit too far, and so the guy dies, and Michael Caine, it's interesting because it's a movie set in England, and so there's actually a big plot point. Like all these other movies, they're just kind of like, I'm back, and then they just get to it. In this movie, there's a big plot point of Michael Caine having to figure out how to get a gun, and like that he has to go to this creepy criminal's house and ends up like having to fight some people in order to get a gun. Like otherwise, that would have been a whole movie of knife crime. But yeah, then he just like rampages through this like gang of young people, and I think at one point like the police kind of are about to stop him, and they're like, "No, let him do it," and he like cleans up the streets of all these youngins.
Whoa!
So many old vigilantes.
Yeah, it's what we're really getting at. I think the core of this, everything we've mentioned, is that old people are above the law. Or at least operate outside of it.
Yeah, but it is interesting that like I don't know if this is just the moment in time, but we do have, as you pointed out, this like surge of movies that are essentially escapism with an older audience in mind.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these plots are no more or less fantastic than anything else, action movie wise, but yeah, I think they are maybe a little unique in the way they are emerging right now with the intended audience of older people, not the youth.
I wonder if there's something there about all of this tide of like old people kicking ass and like not giving a what. It led us to electing one of our oldest presidents ever, who just says whatever the fuck he wants with a no filter. I'm saying that Red caused Donald Trump.
Yeah. I think what we're really getting at is that at the center of it all is the movie Red, retired, extremely dangerous.
He came back for one last job to be the most powerful man on earth.
But it does, this does make me think of Grace and Frankie on Netflix too, to kind of look at the comedic dramatic side as opposed to the kick-ass action movie side of the coin.
In talking about Grace and Frankie, are we still pretending like that show is good, or are we acknowledging that it's not good?
Oh, I don't think it's very good.
And I take Grace and Frankie personally because I felt like duped. Like I felt tricked that it was a really good show, and then about 4 episodes in, I'm like, wait, no, it's not.
Well, for the uninitiated, the plot is that Grace and Frankie are two retired women who find out that their husbands are who are partners in a law firm are also romantic lovers. Ew, I said lovers.
Added to the list of words Gabe has been forced to say on this show that he really does not like.
I really felt like you missed the opportunity to find out that not only are they law partners, they're bed partners.
That's worse than lovers.
I know.
Bed partners.
It sounds like by that definition, so are all of the grandparents in Willy Wonka.
No, but so their two husbands have been in a long-term romantic relationship outside of their marriages, and it's about how Grace and Frankie deal with moving forward as their marriages collapse late in life. Again, it's not a great show by any stretch of the imagination, but I think one of the more interesting things I got from watching the first season of it was that it does not necessarily tread lightly over, one, the social issue of two people dealing with finding out that their husbands are gay and working through all of the layers of that, sort of socially and politically and morally, but also personally. But also just not like demeaning any of the things that come with a marriage collapsing, either in terms of like physical relationships or what it's like to then sort of start looking for a new relationship when you're 70 years old. So I saluted on those merits, not necessarily on the merits of, the writing of an individual episode.
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as that goes, it's definitely presenting a look into area of life that a lot of, at least since it's a Netflix show, Netflix, one might assume, skews a little younger than CBS, and to present that as one of their series is definitely an interesting look into an area of life that you don't typically see on TV, because we're all supposed to just, especially to have two older actresses, when the gross rule of thumb is that the moment you turn like 38, you start only getting cast as grandmothers.
Yeah. I can definitely appreciate that about it, and especially appreciate just how something happening later in their lives sort of recasts a lot of things that happened earlier in their lives too. I was trying to come up with an example of a movie where an old person weirdly dies.
Weirdly dies?
And then finally back.
Well, like an example of a movie where an old person dies and it feels kind of forced, because I think the broader point I would try and make would just be that I feel like a lot of times we use old people in movies the way we also use like a damsel in distress kind of situation. We use them as these like emotional props instead of treating them like actual human beings who have complex histories and emotions.
Yeah, I can't I'm struggling to think of a specific example, but I know exactly what you're talking about. Because my first jump to when you said a movie where an old person dies is Little Miss Sunshine, which isn't necessarily the most they kind of treat it with some real weight. Like the grandfather character is actually a real person, not just a prop.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, Alan Arkin's character definitely has... I mean, they show him dealing with... he gets kicked out of a nursing home for both substance abuse and relentlessly hooking up with the female residents. So yeah, to call him someone without sort of baggage and also a viable mechanism of death. That sounds
when he turns into a guillotine, that was really a weird twist.
I just mean that, and within the context of the film, his death doesn't feel forced and like it's being used to.
Yeah, I feel like
it's not contrived.
I feel like viable mechanism of death is the gritty reboot of Murder, She Wrote.
One of the most successful yet to be caught serial killers in our history.
But also still a very like chill title. Murder, She Wrote, viable mechanism of death. Like neither of them are too in your face.
Yeah, I imagine viable mechanism of death takes place 20 years after the timeline of Murder, She Wrote, where after failing to solve a serial killer crime, Angela Lansbury becomes a recluse whose crime-fighting career is wholly discredited now. So she comes out of retirement for one last crime.
It's like a one-off, like made-for-TV movie to kind of add to the canon of Murder, She Wrote. And to reveal the thing that they just didn't get enough seasons of that show in order to actually get to, which was that she had been a serial killer. Dovetails into like the Hannibal Lecter universe.
Or she was a man in disguise the whole time.
Oh man, it's the ultimate old movie. She's a man in disguise as an older woman who, after being underestimated, commits a series of murders and then technically retires in the form of getting discredited as a writer, but then has to come back into the game for one last job where her old powers continue to thrive.
So it's like the man in disguise premise. Is that sort of inherently weird in that it still robs old people of their legitimacy because ultimately it was just a man in disguise doing something?
Yeah, the reason I brought it up was mostly because it shows an example of how culture treats old people, and not in a good way. Like that it really does, like the whole thing of it being, hey, I'm a capable individual who has to handicap myself by dressing and acting like an old woman. But then every once in a while, the joke is like people are shocked by how capable that person is, but really they're just a capable. Like no one would be shocked if an FBI agent was good at self-defense. So it's only funny because like how hilarious it is to watch an old person, and specifically someone pretending to be an old person. Like they don't even look like that in real life. I think it's definitely not respectful.
Okay. I just wanted to revisit that one point.
Do we want to seal it up, or are we still?
Yeah.
No, I think let's review quickly what all we've thrown in the time capsule. Golden Girls, Murder, She Wrote, from the TV canon.
Nebraska.
Howl's Moving Castle. Red, and Mrs. Doubtfire and Big Mama's house.
Yeah.
And Tootsie.
Perfect.
All right. Is that everything? Ready to seal it up?
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome. Seal her up.